morning. My name is Marit van Dijk. I'm a developer advocate at JetBrains, a Java champion, and I do gigs like these. I'm here today to talk to you about TDD, test-driven development versus tab-driven development. And basically the question for this talk was, can we do strict TDD with AI? So we're going to talk a little bit about what is TDD and then look into whether we can do TDD with AI. I did a series of experiments I'd like to share with you. I'll try to do some demos, not to tempt the demo gods, but AI is non-deterministic, which makes the life of the presenter more exciting, and share the results of those. So let's get on with it. Who uses test-driven development? Okay, some of you. Let's just quickly go over what is test-driven development so we're all on the same page. So the idea of test-driven development is that you write a failing test, or the red phase, you make that test pass, and then you refactor. And by starting with a failing test, you know A, that the test will fail if the behavior is not yet in the application, and B, that you're actually adding new behavior, or that you will be adding new behavior to your application. Never trust a test that you haven't seen fail, to quote myself from my article in 97 Things Every Java Programmer Should Know. Shameless plug, woohoo! Even if no matter what order you do, make sure that your tests also fail if the behavior isn't present, because otherwise you think you have tests and then turns out you don't. So when you have the failing test, the next step is to write just enough code to pass that test, i.e. to make it green. And the upside of that is that you make sure that you only write the code that you actually need, so you don't fall in the trap of you ain't gonna need it. And then finally, there's the refactor phase that is often forgotten, where you have the opportunity to improve the code without changing its behavior, because as you're growing your code with the tests, at some point, you might want to improve and polish that a little bit to make the code a little bit cleaner. TDD is not about testing. Naming things is hard, so I really like this post by Tukey, where he said that TDD gives me enabling constraints because you take small steps. You take every time the smallest step in the right direction. It gives you focus, whether you are trying to describe new behavior in the test, whether you're trying to implement that behavior, or whether you're refactoring and maybe changing the design a little. And while you're doing all of that, you also listen to feedback. You notice whether, does the code that you're writing feel awkward? That might be an idea that or might be a hint that you need a refactor or change something in the design of the code. So you get really, really small feedback loops. And even if you don't test first, I find that it really, really does help to think about what is the intended behavior of this application and how are we going to test this? Because that will help you make sure that you're building the right thing, and also that you're building it in a way that you can actually test it later. To quote Venkat via Mario Fusco, if you hear someone say that this code is hard to test, what they're really saying is the design of this code has room for improvement. But what does this mean in the age of AI? Because code completion is here. The code will be completed as you are typing. You can have syntax highlighting if you're using a nice IDE. And you can use the tab key to accept the suggestions that it's giving you. So if you're using IntelliJ IDEA, we have, sorry, JetBrains do pay me. So we have a local completion, which runs a model that is on your machine, so it doesn't talk to the cloud, which is shown on your right. And you can use the tab to complete. And if you're using AI Assistant, also by JetBrains, then you can talk to cloud models, and you can still use the tab to complete. So, and if you want to know whether the suggestion is local or a cloud suggestion, you can hover over it to see this hint. So Side note, you can change the key that you're using for completion, but since the title of the talk is tab-driven development, and you can also accept partial suggestions. If it's not quite what you want, but part of it is what you want, you can either accept per line or per word even. So for the purpose of this talk, we'll use tab-driven development as AI-assisted programming. My colleague posted this at some point, which is perfect. The perfect laptop for vibe coding. All you need is the tab key. So I'm not the only one who thinks of tab-driven development as AI-assisted development. Who's used JetBrains AI Assistant? Okay, for the rest of you, can I please invite you to give it a try? There is a free trial available. So for those of you who have used it, you might know that you can use it to generate tests from your code. Obviously, that's maybe the wrong way around. Maybe you want to think about what you're going to test first and then write the code. But given that many people don't write tests at all, I will take it. I would rather that you generate them after the fact than not have them at all. I've seen some code bases. But the fact that we can generate the tests from the code does beg the question, what about the other way around? Can we generate the code from the tests? So we don't currently have that functionality, so I kind of did some, like I said, I did some experiments to see what would be the best way to try and do that. I'm going to use JetBrains AI Assistant and JetBrains Junie, our new coding agent. Has anyone tried Junie? Brian. Thanks, Brian. The rest of you, I would like to also invite you to give that a try. So AI Assistant offers a bunch of features that are like relatively small that you can use in your regular workflow. There's an AI chat where you can select the model that you want to use. I'm currently using Claude 3.7 Sonnet, I think. You can also connect it to your local Olama. It gives you a bunch of AI actions in your editor and lots of AI actions throughout your IDE, like generating a commit message, explaining a runtime error. And I especially actually like most of the options that help you work with the code and understand the code. And I think I showed some of them. I did a talk here last year on reading code that includes some of those options. I actually like and use those types of options, like explaining the code, more than I use AI Assistant to actually write code for me. It's a plugin, it's not bundled, so you have to explicitly install it and accept the terms and conditions. If you're worried about it sending stuff to the cloud, it won't unless you explicitly install it and accept that. So we also released Junie recently, your smart coding agent. And Junie is an agent, so you can actually delegate tasks, and Junie will go and do those for you, as we will see. Also a plugin that you have to install and accept the terms and conditions. So for Junie, you can actually give it a task to do stuff for you. So they both have their use, but kind of different use cases. And I actually use both of them at different times. So as said, you can't step into the same River or LLM demo twice. So I'm going to show you the results of some experiments, and we're going to try some live here today. So the experiments that I did on doing TDD with AI Assistant, since there is no equivalent to generate code from tests, I wanted to find the best way to do so. And I started with a really basic problem, FizzBuzz. Is anyone not familiar with FizzBuzz? Okay, so FizzBuzz is an exercise where you take a number, and if the number is divisible by 3, it should reply fizz. If it's divisible by 5, buzz, and by both, FizzBuzz. Okay, as we'll see. And I tried different options on how to best TDD that with AI Assistant. So the first one was to write a test, ask for the implementation, and then maybe ask for refactoring, although FizzBuzz is so simple you probably won't need it. If you do this yourself, writing the tests and writing the code, taking turns, then the code completion will kick in. And as it's a very familiar problem, it will actually finish the whole thing for you. In fact, if you ask AI Assistant about FizzBuzz, yes, I'm familiar with FizzBuzz. It would have been better if it started with certainly. But anyway, maybe if I ask it again. You can ask it for a list of test cases. You can ask for the implementation of those tests in Java. You can also, can you see my mouse? Yes. So you can also apply that code or copy it or insert that caret or create a file from the code that it gives you. So you don't have to go and copy paste from ChatGPT or whatever you're using outside of your IDE, as highlighted there. And you can then also ask for the implementation that passes those tests. So I tried that yesterday and that seemed to work. You can also ask it inline. So if you have the description of the problem, ask it generate the tests based on the description above, which it will do. The method might not be correct because AI Assistant is not as good at getting the code from your code base as Juni is, as we'll see. So overall, a TDD workflow with AI Assistant does work. You can create the tests, ask AI Assistant for code that passes those tests, and apply that code either from the chat or generate it inline. And this works with simple problems like FizzBuzz. We can also do TDD with Juni, where we write a test and then ask Juni for the implementation. But it does help to provide Juni with guidelines first. So you can add a guidelines file where you give Juni general instructions. And in this case, let me smile at Dimitris. Thanks. And it helps to provide guidelines with some general instructions for Juni. If you don't do this and you try to do TDD, then you might end up fighting for control. Or Juni might also alter your tests if you don't tell it not to. So start by creating the tests, ask Juni to add that code to pass the tests, and Juni will also run the tests for you. And actually, let's take a look at how that would work. So we will generate a Java class, FizzBuzz. Yes, I can. I can zoom some more. Better? Light mode, yes. Sorry, bright lights, I should have warned you. Okay, is this better? Perfect, thank you. Okay, so we can, of course, generate tests already from IntelliJ IDEA, but to make my life easier, I created some live templates so that I could just add the tests. So add the code to pass the test. So it should go and work and do that for us, giving us a chance to hydrate while it's working. And let me expand this a little bit. So Juni will actually create a plan of what it's going to do. I forgot to show you, in the beginning there's a little checkbox that says you can run it in Brave mode, which will give you which will give it blanket access to your command line. But since I'm not Brave, I don't do that. But we also have the option to add commands to the allow list. So in this case, let's click this. No, I can also open the allow list. Add similar to the allow list. So hopefully now it won't ask me to click the run commands button again. Also, we saw that the test failed first and now it's passing. We can click done if we like the solution. We can try again or we can decline. At the moment we can't accept partial solutions, but you can of course use Git or version control to do so. Let's add a new test and then ask Juni again. It depends a little bit on the speed of the internet, how fast it's going to go. And showing this is not at all awkward for the presenter while waiting for Juni to do stuff. We can also look at the diff from right here. So we can see that it's changing the code in the way that we would expect. And it did run the task because we told it that it could, and both of the tests pass. So let's add the test for 3, where it should return fizz. So we see that overall this process works, and each time we get the minimum implementation of the code to pass the test that we want to pass. I don't know what would happen if I would start adding the tests now, because then Junie would have to continue to look and add and alter the code. If you give it bigger tasks, then sometimes it keeps going in circles. Okay, all of them have passed. Done. So the next one would be to go to 5, which should return buzz. If there are any questions about Junie at this point, feel free to ask, because I'm just waiting for it to do the work, so I have the time to do other stuff in the meantime. I won't be using Slido, by the way, so if you do have questions, you can ask them either while we're waiting for Junie to work or at the end. And then finally, we will add the tests for 15. Oh. Hang on, my live template got borked. Try again. Yes. So the question is, do AI Assistant and Junie use the context from IntelliJ IDEA as opposed to code that the LLM thinks is relevant? To be fair, I'm not sure, and I don't want to tell you something that is incorrect. So if you really truly want to know, stop by later and I can see if I can find out and get back to you. But yes, both will look at relevant code, but also for AI Assistant, you can add code snippets. So it will add relevant code of where you are when you're asking a question. You can turn code base on so that it will go find more relevant information, and you can explicitly attach files that you think are relevant, or sometimes also unattach files that are not relevant. I had a different application where I was working that included a Python app somewhere, and I was asking for it to write me some code, and because it had the Python app included, it tried to write me Python, and I wanted Java, so I actually had to remove the Python app to get it to write Java for me. So yeah, sometimes you do need to kind of herd it along, as we will see. So in the meantime, we've successfully implemented FizzBuzz. Yes, and I see a question. Yes, good question. Let's look at the code. So we have the code for FizzBuzz, which is probably something you would have written yourself. So if the number is divisible by 3 and 5, it will return FizzBuzz. If it's divisible by 3, it will return fizz. And if it's divisible by 5, it will return buzz. And otherwise, the value of the number that you passed it. Sometimes you get a solution with a string builder, which will append fizz and buzz, but generally, you know, this is a very simple problem that we can all solve, and so can AI Assistant and Junie. But it was more to experiment with the flow of things. There are seats up front if you want. You're welcome. I promised I wouldn't bite. So Junie will create the right code in the right location, and it runs the tests to make sure that they pass. If you have a more complicated problem, sometimes the tests don't pass on the first try, and it will actually try to fix the code to make sure that the tests do pass. You might need to tell it to only change the code and not the tests, because otherwise it might get cheeky. So the TDD workflow with Juni is you can create a test, ask Juni for a code that passes the tests, and repeat until you have the solution. So you can do the short feedback loops even with Juni. It might help to provide guidelines, or it definitely does, about the process of saying, I'm going to provide the tests, you're going to only write the code. We also didn't do any refactoring. I've done that in the past. If you have multiple tests, you can ask it for parameterized tests, for example, and it really does help to take turns. So either you're writing the code and then you let Juni do something, otherwise you might be editing the same file and fighting it for control, which is not what you want. So obviously this is a toy problem. We have only one class. The functionality is extremely limited. What if we have a solution that needs multiple classes? So from an old TDD course, I had an example that had a calculator, and that the implementation of that calculator requires multiple classes, like a validator, arithmetic expression validator, etc. So I asked AI Assistant to implement that for me. So as you can see here, it has some files attached. So it can actually implement the separate classes, but you then have to apply each one individually. And it doesn't always generate them correctly so that they also work, because it doesn't actually run the code for you. So, and the tests do pass. Yesterday I tried it and it did pass, but that isn't always the case if you repeat the same experiment. Like I said, AI is non-deterministic, which makes life more interesting. So we can do the same with Juni. And it will create those classes, create them in the right place, and also run the tests. So I did that experiment. We can actually also do that right now. To make my life easier, I put the stuff in the README so that I can copy paste. Hang on. If I knew how to copy paste, that is. So implement the code that passes the tests in calculator tests. So just to show you, for the meantime, we have empty classes here just so that stuff compiles, but the implementation is not there. So we're asking Juni for that implementation. Juni is going to, again, create a plan. So if you look at the plan and you think, hey, that's not at all what I want, you can also stop and then amend your instructions to give it a bit more information of what you do want. You can see what Juni is doing as it's working. So again, you can also see what it's doing in the classes if you want, once it starts making changes there. Or you can look at the diff from the Juni window, like we saw. So you can look at the diff. I don't know if this is helpful. You can also open the commit window and look at the diff at the end if you want. Which might be more useful. You see some problems popping up because IntelliJ will highlight if your code doesn't compile, but hopefully those will be fixed. Any questions at this point? Yes. Very good question. So we actually have different teams working on different things. And we are trying to convince them to integrate that into one solution. But unfortunately, no luck yet. Simone? Yeah, yes, it can. It's just that in this case, for the example, I wanted it to at least compile. Since I put the project on GitHub, I want the code to compile. But yes, it can create classes. So in this case, we're done. I don't think I have an example, also because I want the demo to somewhat work when I'm on stage. But yes, it can create the classes. Sometimes it might even change its mind and create a class and then move it. And then, so, you know, doing the refactoring while it's working. But yes, and I'll show you some more stuff that it can do. So anyway, we see that Juni is fine with editing multiple files and getting a solution to work. Again, still a toy problem. But I really like the fact that Juni will create tests, run the tests, and make sure that they pass, unless you would explicitly tell it not to, strictly for demo purposes. I have another talk where we actually do that because we want to make sure that the stuff runs quickly. So, you know, we saw that it works for toy problems, but what about an actual app? So I wanted Juni to implement an app based on tests. So for that, I needed an example with tests. So I actually reverse engineered from a different app because I already asked Juni to build me an app at some point. So I created a Spring Boot project and asked Juni to implement a small to-do app because I was in a talk by another speaker who was building a to-do app as she was on stage. So I'm like, let's see if Juni can do that too. Spoiler, Juni did, and faster. Also this was in January, so the interface of Juni is different than it looks now. The plan is a lot more, a lot smaller. I didn't update these to do it again with newer Juni, but there have been like a gazillion updates since January on Juni where we continuously improve Juni. So I asked it to build me a small to-do app that lets me add a to-do, mark it as done and delete it, and then also so that I could actually start it and test it to add a front end. I'm a back-end engineer. I cannot front end to save my life, so Juni helped me. And it built me a small app that worked. I can add a task, mark it as done, and delete the task. So the code is done, but is it tested? We saw that Juni adds tests and runs tests, so I know that some tests were added. But I wanted to have an idea of how good are the tests. No pressure at all, by the way, that there are JUnit folk in the room. Thanks. Anyway, so let's use Juni to check up on Juni. So first I wanted to add some JCON coverage, which, you know, I can do from the documentation, but I don't do it a lot, so I'd have to look up how to do it and how everything works. So in this case, I asked Juni, add JCON for code coverage in the POM XML. I use Maven for the Maven folks who might be here. Add coverage with JCON, and then you can look at the report to see how well your code is covered. So we see that some of it is not covered. A tip here is to tell Juni to make sure that the report is generated and add how to generate it to the README. Again, I could look all of that up, but it's much faster to ask Juni to do it. Plus, you know that you have a working solution, because Juni will make sure that the report is generated. Next, I want to see, you know, if we have the coverage, how well do they actually kill mutations if I change my code? Again, never trust a test you haven't seen fail. So I asked it to add a PyTest, which is a mutation test framework. Anyone who doesn't know what mutation testing is? Okay, so basically what it will do is it will change your code and then run your tests again and make sure that those tests fail if the code was changed. So for example, flip a bigger than to a smaller than and make sure that your tests fail. So it basically tests your tests. So I added PyTest to see where mutations were not killed. Again, the tip to make sure that the report is generated and add how to the README. And I was really afraid that at some point Juni would be like, I can't do that, Dave. But it allowed me to check up on itself, so that was pretty cool. So we identified that the test coverage was not great, so I asked Juni to increase the test coverage for things that weren't quite tested. So we got it to somewhat acceptable percentages, and then I just started with that. First, I removed the implementation from the code base and asked Juni to build it based on the tests, but someone suggested that it might get it right based on project history. So just to make sure, I created an empty project, copied only the tests in, and asked Juni to build the app based on those tests. And it's actually able to do so. And like I said, the tests don't always pass on the first try, and then Juni will try to fix your code to make sure that the tests do pass, and you can see them running. Also, if you don't tell it what the front end should look like, which as a backender, this is about what you might get if I would implement it, you get some not so pretty plain HTML maybe. So if you do want to give it hints on what it should look like, it might help to provide guidelines. So also in terms of versions that you use, LLMs of course have a cutoff date, so it doesn't always know the most recent version of a library. It might help to put those numbers in the guidelines. Juni might also, or I guess all AI assistants and agents might helpfully upgrade your projects from Java 21 to 17, for example, or Elasticsearch 9 to 8, because it claims that 9 does not exist, even though it was released on the same date as Juni. And it might help to provide some guidelines also for what the front end should look like. Pro tip, you can actually ask AI assistant in your project, hey, generate me some guidelines from these HTML files. It will helpfully do those, and then you can copy them over. So, because again, I'm a backender, I don't know anything about front end. I'm just like, ooh, that's pretty, or that is not pretty. This is still not pretty, but it's prettier. So, again, ask AI assistant to generate visual guidelines based on an existing implementation. So we can then ask Juni to implement this app, which is again going to take some time. So here's the Brave mode button that I keep forgetting to show you. There's also an ask mode if you want to ask Juni questions. So for example, if you're still brainstorming on what the app should be, you can give it some ideas and ask it, hey, can you generate a plan on how I would go about building this type of application, and break it up into separate steps. You can then, from that document, ask Juni to implement that application. Although I find I get better results if I ask it smaller questions, and also that gives me smaller components that I can then verify myself and make sure that they work. If you give it a bigger task where it has multiple steps and it ends up not working, you have stuff that you didn't build that you have to try to understand and try to debug. Who likes debugging other people's code? Oh, some of you, nice. Okay, well, it helps if you have a nice debugger, that is true. So you're gonna have to explain to me why you like debugging other people's code though. So Juni is working. While Juni is working, any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to start telling programming jokes while we wait. Yes? That's a yes? Okay. So there are two hard things in programming. Naming things, cache invalidation, and off by one errors. Okay. Someone save me. Questions? Okay, so we can see that Juni is working, and I think here it is actually creating classes because these are not in Git yet. It used to be that Juni would ask you for each file that it was creating, should I add it to Git, the same way that IntelliJ IDEA does, which is quite annoying if you're trying to build an app that needs multiple classes. So they changed that to ask all the way at the end, where you can click to add everything to Git, or of course you can use the integrated version control, which is pretty good in the IDE that I'm using, which is it. Anyway, yeah. No, no. So you can't select currently the model that Juni is using. Off the top of my head, we're using Anthropic and OpenAI, or is that the same? I get lost. For AI Assistant, like I said, you can actually change models. Some of these might be available only to me as someone who works at JetBrains, you know, the experimental ones possibly. And like I said, you can also, I don't currently have Olama running, but if I did, I could connect with that. So for the AI assistant chat, you can select the model that you're using. But also for the other AI assistant actions throughout the IDE, you also can't change the model. So it worked for me to edit my POMs for the Jacoco and PyTest stuff. I'm not sure off the top of my head which languages we do and do not support, because I use mostly Java, occasionally Kotlin, and my co-speaker wrote some Python in for our other talk. Or had Juni write it, I'm not exactly sure. But we are working on making Juni available in all our IDEs. I know that currently it's available in IntelliJ IDEA and PyCharm and WebStorm. I think I saw a social media post that it's available in PHP Storm. And I know that but I since I'm mostly in Java, I don't keep track of all of them. I could probably find out for you if someone really, really wants to know. But we're working on supporting more languages and more of our IDEs. I think I might have seen another question. All the way in the back. Can you tune Juni to use your own coding style? So you can create the guidelines file where you can tell it what you would like it to do. I see that we don't actually have the guidelines with the visual, so let's see what it comes up with. So you can provide it with information. I'm not sure whether it actually learns from your code style or your code base. I think it does look at your code base to make sure that it's hopefully somewhat consistent. But mostly we suggest using the guidelines to tell it what to do. Yeah, so you can also give it a code as a reference. But also we're working on a repository that will have some guidelines for different types of projects. So, you know, guidelines files will be like the new dot files or whatever. Okay, so we see that it's run the tests and created a bunch of classes, and now it's done. So let's actually see whether we can run the application. Well, at least it starts up, so that's already better than some of the applications. I'm just saying. Anyway, so we have a to-do app. I think I saw that it didn't actually have the visual guidelines in this one to say what colors it should use. But it's still prettier than I would build, so I can do a to-do. So present at JCON, which I should be able to mark as done pretty quickly. And then I can delete that as well. And then we can answer any question. I can't type. Questions that you might have. So we can build an app. We noticed that using only the tests might not be enough. We might need additional guidelines on what it should look like or what coding styles to use and things, if you care about coding styles at all. Or if you care about any other things like, does the application start? What about security, right, Brian? Performance, code quality, etc. Because, you know, AI can write the code for you very quickly, and then you have the joy, apparently, some of you, of debugging that. There's definitely a learning curve in what requirements do you give it, what guidelines, how to write the prompts, which models to use if you have a choice on which models. My colleague Siva, who is one of the ones working on the guidelines repository, finds babysitting LLMs with guidelines extremely amusing, apparently. And we had this lovely interaction. Hi, Roland. Simon also should be here at JCON later. So in some cases, or is already here, I don't know. So, you know, bring your friends. In some cases, Juni doesn't follow the guidelines, and that's also with what you write in the guidelines. I mentioned, we have another talk where we tried to get it to write Kotlin, and it kept using Java math square root, and I wanted to use Kotlin math square root. But despite writing, please use idiomatic Kotlin, pretty please, in the guidelines, it kept using the Java math square root. So I also haven't quite figured out how to get it exactly the way I want it. Of course, there's an inspection to go from the Java to the Kotlin, but you know. And you know, sometimes it takes some time, which gives you time to answer questions, hydrate, tell stupid jokes, but the new slacking off is my code is generating. Or waiting for it to, this is by Julien Langrand, who wrote about his experience using Juni, blatantly stealing his meme. So while it's possible to do strict TDD with AI, generating the code based on the tests alone does not always give reliable results, or at least not me. Maybe my prompt engineering needs a lot of work for sure, but it helps to provide additional guidelines to tell it what to write. I think that there is still value in defining the requirements and the guidelines and think about what you're trying to build and how. I also especially still think that there's value in fast feedback, also in breaking up the problem and making sure, okay, I have this and it works, and working in smaller increments, because I've tried to get it to vibe code an app for me and got hopelessly stuck. So a tip from Anton, my colleague, whenever you see an agent going in circles, it's a good indication that you should step back and redo the guidelines or the prompts and break it up into smaller pieces. He's also doing a lot of live streams, so if you want to see Juni in action with more interesting problems than the small toy problems that I showed you here today, definitely check that out. Like I said, debugging is harder if you didn't build or understand it, so break it up into smaller pieces. I like this post by Jason. AI is going to transform the way we develop software. We need to be precise about our requirements, work in short feedback loops, be always cleaning up the mess, and continuously test everything. So, radical change. Well, for some of you, I've seen some of your tests or lack thereof. So, and they say that the hottest new programming language is English or maybe other natural languages, but let's see. So that's all from me. I'll be around all day today, and then I'm going to the next one. You can find the slides and a lot of links to related materials on my website if you follow this QR code. Thanks.